Yes, yes. For a writing panel, there will be absolutely no writing.
Yeah, well, I mean, are you probably going to learn how to write?
Not even that. For this, I'm not even going to talk about the mechanics of writing. When it comes to writing, there are many ways to do it. Many people have their own goofy ways. This is the only writing panel in which writing is not included, which is good if you're dyslexic. Finally, some people are starting to pay attention. So, as a start, my name is Blondie. I am a guy. If you know who I am, hey. If you don't know who I am, even better. The reason for this panel is about a year ago, ended up going to a place called Cider Fest. The writing panel there, dude published comics. He seemed like a very professional type guy. He is completely fucking boring. He went into stuff saying, this is the protagonist, this is the antagonist. A lot of shit that you learn in high school, if not middle school. It's not exactly what people want to hear. If they're interested in writing, they already know how to write and they want to do better, or they just want to see what the hell is going on with writers. So that's why I decided on this. My first panel was a nice train wreck on MLPCon. It was supposed to be for an hour, lasted for 2.5 hours. No one stopped me until the very end, so I guess that's something.
There wasn't anything after?
Yes. So the most I can only go is about a half hour over. So that's not too bad though. But with this, Horsewords and you, the focus on this is characters and what motivates them. Now, it sounds very basic because when you think of motivation, well, a character wouldn't do anything without motivation. For example, what's your motivation of coming here? To MareFair, to this Gloria...
To meet some good friends, bro.
There you go. See, that's your motivation, and guess what? It's an actual motivation. You didn't have to stare at a wall for 20 minutes figuring out, why am I here? Maybe you did when you first got here, but it's better now.
There's some people like that.
Yeah, see, exactly. There's motivation with everyone being here. There's motivation with everyone being here even right now, which is more than 6 people, so that's kind of nice. But when it comes to writing, a lot of people, and I say this because years ago I had the same issue. Even now when I talk to some people about writing, they're saying, hey, I don't know what this character should do next. It's like, well, what would they do? Well, I don't know, I gotta figure it out. I can understand that, but at the same time, it's something where if you know your character, you should know why they're doing the things that they do. That extends to how they react to ups, downs, lefts, rights, surprises, things that are completely planned. You know, it's what's the difference between a good day and a bad day. Usually whatever you expect good happens, actually happens. When it doesn't happen, not only is that a cheap plot hook if you really want it to be that way, but it's a good way to test your character and say, how would they react under this form of duress? So, with that said, there are 2 aspects to motivation and a character that I want to go into. Again, this is a writing panel, not talking about writing. Instead, I'm going to be nice and show off my associate's degree by talking about psychology and philosophy. Because when you think fucking writing, you think those 2, right? So, it seems goofy, but there's a reason behind it. Because, guess what? A character is a person. She's a pony, but she's still technically a person. And by the way, that's a plush. If she talks to you, call the cops. Yeah. No, don't take your pills. Just call the cops in that order and then take pills. As soon as they see you, just fucking shove them. So, the first aspect that I want to focus on is the psychology. Now, I swear I have a very good reason for this. When it comes to conflict, which every story has in any fucking form, whether or not it's Harry Potter, whether or not it's Redwall, whether or not it's you reading, I don't know, Vogue, there's always going to be a conflict. And the question is, what do you do in that conflict? A lot of people will write their characters in service of the plot. If you watch a lot of goofy fucking Hollywood movies, you're going to see exactly that. They don't know what they're doing. They drop the ball. They made a completely stupid mistake they would obviously never make. They rewrote the character in a completely bad way. Why? Because of the plot. And that's how you get the newest Indiana Jones movie. Yes.
Can you try speaking as though you're trying to speak to the person at the furthest reaches
Sure.
of the audience?
I can stand up too if that helps. Yes. Now I shall stand behind the table to effectively cancel that out. So, for the first aspect, mentioning of psychology when it comes to a character, That is how they react on a gut instinct. It's what they tend to view the world as. A good example, psychological, would be if you have a character who's a rather pessimistic sort. Their psychology is going to be, well, if something bad happens, they're probably going to expect it. They're probably going to be angry. They're probably going to do a lot of stuff that is going to further aid them to being a pessimist. It's why when you're around them, they're such a nice bundle of joy. Consequently, when you have a pessimist where they have good things happen, they don't really talk that positively. They don't go, oh yeah, this is awesome, luck is changing. They tend to go, meh, and then they wait for the next bad thing to happen. Then when the next bad thing happens, so on and so forth. That'll go into the next part, which is more their philosophical side, but focusing more on psychology now. Now, an interesting thing about the psychology aspect that I like, which not necessarily just because I'm a sadist, but when it comes to the psychology of a character, the biggest aspect is, of course, characters grow, right? And what makes people grow. Other than really good stuff, really bad stuff. So when you have trauma, that's why you have all this myriad of, you're on the spectrum, you have this mental illness, that mental illness. It's all psychology, because it's how you work up in the freaking brain. And again, characters are people. Not a person, still a character. So when you have that in mind, you have to think, all right, I'm in this setting, there's a heated discussion going on, I'm uncomfortable just reading this, and I still have to finish writing it. At that point, you say, all right, what would make this wrap up really nicely? You can't do that. You can't throw away characters in service of the type of story you want to write. You have to allow the characters to reach that conclusion. The way they will get that is if they're in a good place. Which means if you have a complete train wreck of a person, of a character, of a pony, you might not necessarily get that happy ending. At the end of this conflict, you may have something that's ugly, bitter, strongly distasteful, and yet it happened. It's the ups and downs of people, and it has to be an up and down of your story as well. Now, if that's not necessarily what your story is, you don't have to include it. Not everything is a massive life or death situation. Sometimes it's as simple as going to the grocery store and saying, oh no, the blueberries are gone, god damn it. Whereas someone who isn't the same psychologically will just go, there are blueberries, but hey, they have a sale on pineapple. You can have the exact same situation with many different characters, but it depends on what they're thinking and how they're thinking it to get something completely different. That's something that, not to show myself too much, but when it comes to the stuff that I enjoy writing, I enjoy thinking of what a character is thinking, how they're thinking it, and what they will actually do about it. So when it comes to, by the way, this is all that I've written down. And by the way, if you can read this, you don't need glasses. So just as a heads up to those. So when it comes to psychology, the other big thing, the very obvious thing, so obvious I skipped over until just now, are emotions. Now, I did touch on being a pessimist, I did touch on being an optimist. Now, the question is, if you're an optimist, but you're very angry and hungry because you just had a bad day, can that be enough to just screw something over? Again, depending on the severity of it, depending on what tips them over, that might be. Even if it isn't, it's something that would leave a lasting impact where by the time they go to sleep, it may still be with them. That's worth it because a lot of the stories that I read where you tend to get just constant conflicts, constant arguments, it seems like, oh, the day's over, new chapter, everything's back to status quo. You can't really do that. A lot of people don't work that way. The asterisk is that if you do have that, then you have to understand that it's only been a day. They may be acting like everything's okay, but it may be fucking festering in their head. Now, whether or not that manifests in a way that the reader can tell, that doesn't matter. All that matters is what you're doing and how well you can execute it. When it comes to people reading shit, 50 Shades of Grey is one of the planet's best-selling book series, and it's fucking Twilight fan fiction. There's no accounting for taste. So, with that in mind, by all means, write as you will, and whether or not it's good, who fucking cares? At least you're doing it. So, one thing that I did want to add in when it comes to pessimism and optimism, especially when it comes to emotions,
wanted to say, I was taught in the school of writing that's basically the exact opposite of this. You're talking a lot about character-driven plots, but I was taught more about plot-driven characters, which you explicitly frowned upon.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit more about why you prefer having characters drive the plot as the characters is the focus rather than the plot, rather than the characters being made for the plot? Can you please
Sure.
tell me more about that?
Because the stories I like to write and the stories I like to read focus on the characters. Think about it this way. I was guilty of it too. If you've ever played Dwarf Fortress, if you've ever tried making a world and creating a history and creating a country, and you work all the way up from the very top down to the very bottom and saying, how does this character work? What I've enjoyed doing is reversing that. I focus on the character, and then the setting comes up as it comes up. When it comes to any sort of wider setting, let's be honest, you're a character, you live wherever you live, you came here today. Do you really care about like whatever stuff is going on in Italy right now?
In Italy?
Yeah.
No, I don't give a fuck.
All right, well, why should you as a writer?
I shouldn't. In
Exactly.
America, it's a different country. Who cares?
Exactly. So when it comes to writing, at least the way I see it, if you're going to focus on a story that has a select few characters, unless you're going to try to do some weird Game of Thrones shit, having a massive setting, having a massive focus, and spending so much fucking time saying, oh, I'm going to focus on the history, the last 2,000 years. I need to know the economy, the politics, all this goofy shit. How much is it going to come up in the story?
Probably not a lot.
Exactly. Now, if you want to do it that way, there's no wrong way to write a story. I'm just saying what works for me. And that's after years of writing a lot of shit that after 30, 40 more thousand words, I just delete it and say, eh. I try to focus so much on the details and it doesn't work and I hate it and it's fucking boring. The worst part, it's fucking boring. So, at least when you focus on characters first and you expand as required, and you can have a single setting that just never changes. And you can still make it interesting because of the characters that inhabit it. Think of that 70s show. Like, half the show takes place in a fucking basement. Half of that takes place in the circle where they're all fucking stoned. But it's interesting, isn't it? You see how they go through their issues. You see how they grow or don't. You find out what their comfort zone is and what they're adverse to when it comes to the topic of growth. And it's, granted, it's a show, you have more physical humor that you can get away with compared to writing, but it's still a good example I would say is worth it. Now again, whether or not you want to do that or not, it's up to you, depends on the story. If you're writing about 3 losers and another loser, you don't really care about what's going on in other parts of the world. You go as far as, let's go camping. Yeah! And then depending on how they are, 3 weeks will pass. Hey, do you still want to go camping? Yeah. Why do you want to go? I don't know. That's the comfort zone, and that's them resisting any form of growth. Which, it can be boring. Sadly, a lot of people are boring too. So, it can be worth it to include that at the risk of alienating a reader versus something that you would consider to be more honest. And honesty is not always the best policy when it comes to entertainment.
Essence versus mass appeal, right?
Yes. And mass appeal, again, 50 Shades of Grey. If you want to go for it, fucking go for it, man. You'll make money that way. So, didn't lose my point, or I didn't lose my train of thought. What I wanted to focus on when it comes to the psychological side of motivation is what I also want to talk in when it comes to my next panel, focusing on morality. Morality, different conversation, but it ties in a lot with the psychological and physical, philosophical aspect of a character. So, with the psychology, we have a basic understanding as far as needing to know a character. You don't really need to have a degree. You don't need to read through the fucking boring-ass textbooks. You just need to know when it comes to a character, what's going on, what makes that character them, happens up here. All in the main. Not in the head, but the main. So haircuts, very life-changing. For us, not so much. Next is the philosophical. Now, the philosophical is something that's a little bit more nebulously defined because you have the psychology, which is how they tend to react to most things. What's interesting is the philosophy side. Now, you have your pessimist, right? How does that affect them on a philosophical level? Are they naturally a pessimist because you have the psychology of bad stuff has always happened, so they adjust to it, their worldview becomes pessimistic? Or is it something where you have someone who's normally very upbeat or otherwise clueless, and just bad stuff keeps happening to them? Now, they can still maintain their positive outlook on life, and the fun thing is they're going to be challenged. That challenge is also fun writing. It's going to suck, especially if it's a character you like and it's going to go into very dark places. You're going to have to fucking stick with it. It's going to suck. You're not going to want to finish it. You're going to want to find some way to cheap out. You can't do that because there's no cheap outs when people actually go through shit, for better or worse. And even if you have a support system, say if a character does, then bring that up as well. How well do they know the other character? How does the other character react? Do they actually care about making the first character feel any better? That's other things to think of. That's a deeper well than I want to go into. But that's the type of thinking that I come to when it comes to a group issue. And honestly, when it comes to issues, you always want to have multiple people involved, at least when it comes to an understanding. Even if it's just, everyone shit talks to a coworker and says, I fucking hate this guy, I hate that, this, that, fucking kids, that, whatever goofy shit. There's always at least someone to talk to. And in a lot of stories, you're very rarely going to have someone so completely isolated they don't just open up to someone random. And even if it is someone random, that's fine. They don't have to necessarily be an important character either. So, same thing with the philosophical aspect. Same question, how do they react with certain emotions? Because it can either make it worse or make it better. That leads to the most interesting side is combining the two. So, we know their view on life, we know their view on success, on failures, how they act under stress, not just in the moment, not just in the relative short term, but we know if this is something they're used to, if this is something they're not used to, if they're resilient enough to be able to move past it, or if they're changed by it. And just then, I said something that's an interesting word, but a very naughty word. That word is change. And that, it can make or break a lot of characters. I'm not talking about putting a pair of wings on a unicorn or anything like that. It's a different type of change. But I am talking about how you have character A at the very start, very set in their ways. You know exactly how they're like, you know exactly how they're going to react, and by the end of the story, you barely recognize them. That, if it's done properly, I would argue, if they've gone through enough to either galvanize their views or challenge them and then end up finding something better or finding something worse, you'll end up having something that is, whether or not it's positive or negative, growth. And yes.
If we have a story with a flat character arc where the character has their pre-existing views confirmed, I think that's what you mean by galvanizing their views.
Yes.
If we have that sort of story, where is the change? How do we express how the character has changed over time to represent their increased confidence?
Well, with that, it would come from trials. It would come from whatever conflicts and confrontations they would have. Say if you have someone where, character A, they stay this way, and by the end of the story, they're still that way. That means if it's an interesting story, if it's a story worth writing, and arguably a story worth reading, there's something that happens to them where they can be a very solid rock in a fucking typhoon. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't changed. It means that their beliefs, again, negative or positive, have remained, and they've used whatever it takes, either logical, philosophical, psychological, and they just kind of say, you know what, this sucks, but that's fine because, that doesn't change my beliefs of this is still happening. Yeah, this bad stuff happened, but it's not any worse than anything else. Now, if you want to play with that, you can go ahead and, if something worse happens, see if that budges them. And of course, with that, it would depend. That's a very interesting idea, and depending on the story, that would probably be easier to do than not. But I can't really think of any specific examples off the top of my head other than it being a not very big story or someone who's already so set in their ways that they just simply refuse to budge.
I'm thinking of Goku in Dragon Ball Z. He remains basically the same character optimistic, generally a kind-hearted person from the beginning of the story all the way to the end, except for the moment where he turns Super Saiyan, where he experiences malice for the first time.
Oh yeah. Well, to be fair, you're probably talking about the English dub, and Goku does have brain damage. So to be fair, that kind of stunts him a tiny bit.
Actually, no, in the Japanese dub, it's more malicious. In the English, there's been more than.
Yeah, in the English, he's kind of built up to be like a alien Superman, so basically Superman. And in the original Japanese version, he's just like a dude who loves fighting. It's like that's all he's done as a kid. That's all he does as an adult. I think I recall from Dragon Ball Super, it's just his entire thing. He doesn't really care about other planets or galaxies. He's just, hey, you're strong. I want to fight you. You know, it's like that meme. Your porn addiction is strong. Let me fight it. And depending on who he's talking about, he either wins or loses. So for stuff like that, him having a flat character, to be fair with Dragon Ball, a lot of the reason why people pay attention is the fighting, the power levels, the numbers, the just the enjoyment of seeing even stronger people. But when it comes to writing, the most interesting writing is when you had the cyborgs, or no, the androids, because at least then it's like, oh cool, Goku gets killed by a fucking heart attack. But once they get rid of that, it's all back to the normal fighting. And somewhere along the lines, Krillin gets laid. Yes.
So this is related. What do you think about circular arcs, where a character who believes something and the plot is essentially them having to doubt as their challenges makes them question their morality and their beliefs, but at the end of the story, ultimately they were right all along. Is that what you meant when you said a rock against a typhoon? Or
Yes.
is this more of like a wave?
It can be, yes. Reason for that is because, just as you said, if it's something that they're sure against, again, say you have someone very good, very kind, I don't want to say pure of heart necessarily, but just let's call it unaware of the wider surrounding in the wider world, you can have a lot of shit happen to them, but they're still going to believe, well, surely things will get better. They will continue to get better, and I'm not going to let them keep me down. For some people, that is all it takes. We have some real world Gokus out there where anything can happen to them, and they're just going to keep on fucking trucking along. Yeah, so it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just some people are wired like that. If you have someone like that in your story, that's not a bad thing. But when everyone is that exact same character and they react to everything that way, you might have to assess your character more realistically. It's like, would they really be okay with this? You know, when they're by themselves thinking about it, and you have to think this deep too, if they're dwelling on an issue, you have to follow that through. Again, the reader might not pay attention to that. It might not even be written down, but you have to know because you're writing their story. So, and that's why I have to say, and especially you're writing their story, because after a certain point, you're just the fucking fly in the wall. It's their story, you're the one doing it. Now, if you end up fucking shoehorning other things in, again, 50 Shades of Grey. So, since we're talking about different types of growth, different types of arcs, that kind of fits into my next point. When it comes to a character's internal arc, that doesn't necessarily have to be a massive thing, because as we just discussed, they can remain in the exact same spot. They could be in the exact same spot, but more devout in their beliefs. They could be completely changed, or in a less positive way, completely broken by it. And that's, sadly, that happens. It's not exactly the most positive thing. You may not necessarily plan for it to be a negative thing, but depending on the outcome, depending on what layers on, and just what happens, that could have a drastically different ending. A good example, when you decided to get a ticket for here, there's another instance where you decided to say, nah, I'm not going to get the ticket. It's a very tiny thing, but it can lead to massive consequences. That said, not everything's as important, not everything is as high gravity, because again, it's a fucking convention. It's the blueberries versus pineapple example. So, next point that I have on here, which again, very nice and detailed, is the idea of someone having an arc and then someone having their moment of growth or their moment of decay, or they're still the same person despite everything. You know, despite everything that happened, you're still you, right? There is the question of when is a character done growing? And it's an interesting question to have, because say you have a character where you think they're done growing, but the story's not done. So the question is, what exactly do you do after that? Do you take them out of the story and focus on everyone else who's still in their weird little goofy inner turmoil bullshit? Or do you decide, you know what? There's still something that could change. And I'm not saying that as a plot hook. I'm not saying that as a cheap writing tactic of, aha, when I make a sequel and everyone loves it and it becomes super popular, then there will be even more stuff, like Dragon Ball. Sometimes it can just be, all right, everyone's good to go. Everyone's hit their point. Regardless of what has changed externally in their setting and their own personal story, if they've hit their own moment where they're like, you know what, I can jam with this. Shit still sucks, or it's gone a lot better. It's gone to the point where they're not necessarily numb, but it's either something that's caused a philosophical or psychological change in them where it's no longer a big deal. Now, whether or not that continues to imprint on them or not, again, it depends on your story. Without too many keen examples, the most I can give you is the conceptual tool, and then just see where it goes from there. And I like the DBZ example especially, just because when it comes to that, depending on your story, all of what I just said doesn't mean a fucking thing. Because it can just be, here's the dude, he likes to fight, fucking fight him. Bam, that shit was cool, wasn't it? Come back next week, I'm gonna have more fucking fighting. And by the end of it, everyone still had fun. The dude with the fucking 5 head is still angry, the aliens are still aliens, and you know what? It doesn't matter. You had fun. And that's the point of that story. Not every story is gonna be fun. I would like to say it's as long as you, the writer, have fun, but you don't have to have fun either. You can write a very good story that's fucking miserable. Just because, depending on the story, that's how it goes.
One of those stories. One story was fucking miserable.
Yep. And there is a difference between a good, miserable story and just outright misery porn. And there's a ton of stuff out there where it's like the teen drama manga that's out there where it's like, oh, everything bad just happens, and it's like that Shindle Dujin where it's like, oh no, she wants to be popular, and at the end she's maybe dead but maybe alive, no one knows. It's all just bad mistake after bad mistake, and she's too fucking spineless to change it. Yes.
How do you mix the good and the bad? How do you balance it out where, like if it's supposed to be a somewhat balanced story, it's not supposed to be like, it's not supposed to be a kind of like a, those sad stories that are just there for sadness. How do you balance something where the characters get something good and something also bad happens to them?
For that, depends on the story. I can't give you an answer, but I swear it's not because I'm copping out on you. It's because with every story, every setting, with every batch of characters, if there's a success in a rather negative environment, surely someone else is going to notice, right? If you have someone where if they're just wallowing, they do something really good, they don't really have to necessarily telegraph it. But if someone else notices, maybe that can start a conversation. Maybe they're being coerced into just, hey, let's fucking talk it out. You're giving me the weird fucking look. Just let's squash this right now. It depends on how the characters are and how they interact with each other. Good example too, or not necessarily a good example, but a good aspect is when you have different characters, you have to remember maturity levels too. Not just when it comes to age necessarily, because if a kid is having a bad day, you're the fucking adult, just focus on positives. And because they're nice and squishy little impressionable binds, you can probably make it more positive if you try. When in doubt, Thomas the Tank Engine. Now, when you have different adults, that's why you have different personalities, different characters. If something happened to any of us, I'm pretty sure every single one of us would have a different reaction to it. If we want to help them, we'll focus on something positive. It's like, dude, that's a bitchin' shirt. That's a nice haircut. I wish I had that hat. Now, conversely, if I could say, you know what, Chrysalis sucks. She's the worst princess after Celestia, after Luna, and after, I consider her princess. She's not much of a queen, I'll give you that. So, or I can say, you know what, that's a dumb fucking hat. If I want to be positive or negative, if a character wants to be positive or negative, if they even really care, they may do something kind of stoke the fires. But that, again, it would depend on your story, because not everyone is so social. Not everyone likes talking shit out. A lot of people like to just fucking bottle it up until they explode. And when it comes to hashing out topics, it could be until someone fucking explodes. Or someone witnesses something else exploding. So there's a lot of ways. Again, that's why I like saying that for writing panel, this isn't about writing. This isn't about mechanics of writing. This isn't about how you write a story, but more just understanding how people work. Characters work. Again, not a person. Call the cops. So with that all said, by the end of it, ideally, you should know the character's past. If you don't know their past, they will tell you through their actions, or you can at least figure something out, or just, you're going at it, something happens, and then you go, oh, well, fuck. That's not what I had in plan, but, if it works, it works. And it doesn't necessarily have to work until it works later. Who's to say? You're not the one writing it, you're just telling it. So, yep.
You have an incredibly difficult time understanding people to begin with.
Then it is a good example to think of certain characters, say the main six. When it comes to Purple Smart, you can probably guess what she's like. There's, I'm sure, hundreds of videos out there describing how to characterize what she's like. Some say she's autistic, some say she's like a high-strung grade A student. There are a lot of ways to interpret her. What matters is your interpretation. Everyone else is wrong, objectively. But outside of that, it's something where as you build an understanding of this character, and because she's already written, you can look through at however many seasons you consider to be canon and say, all right, in this situation, she reacts this way. Why? And throughout the episode, you'll see exactly what sets her off to begin with. That's why I like Lesson Zero so much, because you have someone who seems so on the ball, so well put together. You have everyone in fucking season one just losing their shit at least once, and you just see someone who's on top of it all, and you're like, dude, this chick's untouchable, what the hell? And then you see what sets her off, because that's the only type of thing that sets her off. And through that, you can see how she's reacted to traumatic events, or at least very high stressful events to other characters, and whether or not she laughs it off, doesn't understand it, or doesn't really care, until it happens to her. And then it's the thing of, well, shit, this is very important to me. Everyone's laughing about it, everyone's putting it lightly, or they just don't care. And you see how she reacts from that. When it comes to, I don't really want to say Star Wars, but say the original 3 movies, as a very concise adventure, you can kind of see the certain growth that Luke has. Just because he starts from a complete nobody, just lives on a fucking desert planet, what does he know, right? Then through that, he has his own psychological aspects of learning to be a Jedi, understanding that his father, one of the most evil characters in the fucking universe, is his dad. I know I said father is his dad, but some people don't know that. Spoilers, by the way. And then you eventually have him rising to that challenge and saying, you know what? I'm a Jedi like my father before me. But that doesn't say who he is. He's chosen a completely different path. He's stuck to it. He's galvanized to, arguably the light side, because he saw himself turning dark. He could see himself slipping. If he did that, if he allowed himself to, well, we already saw what became of his dad because of that. So in that specific example, you would have a really good example of saying, hey, my dad did this, maybe I shouldn't do that. Now, to be much more uncomfortable, same example, Luke Skywalker, normal dude living in fucking Detroit. Everyone's depressed because it's Detroit. His dad, alcoholic. Well, if you still have that arc, you can still have Luke say, well, you know what, my dad's an alcoholic, he's been to prison fucking 5 times. I know exactly what happened to him, and I'm on my 3rd shot. Why? Because, I don't know, I was bored. Or maybe a tiny little thing set me off. And if we follow the same arc, you'll have him say, you know what, I understand what's happening, I can't let that happen. Now, again, that's just a random example I put out my ass, bastardized, again, like 50 Shades of Grey. But it's still something I'm sure at least one person found insightful. So, yeah, it's something where I'm not exactly going to say I'm a massively social person, but I can I can imagine what someone would be going through and how they would react to certain situations. I'm not saying to people watch, but if you know someone really well and you can kind of tell what their tendencies are, you can kind of not necessarily jot it down or be autistic about it, but you can say, hey, if I get someone like a gift, that's kind of okay. You know how they're going to react. But if you really want to like get them something really good, because you don't know how they're going to react or it's going to be funny, you go that step above, and then you get disappointed if they react the same way. It's like, dude, what the fuck? This is an awesome thing. And he's like, eh. So there's a lot of ways. When it comes to difficulties, the only thing I can think of is look at fiction, look at what's already written, look at shows that already focus on characters rather than, say, a wider scope. Just because they already did the heavy lifting, that's just where you analyze. That's where you kind of piece together what you can. Through your own practice, you can kind of say, all right, here is my version of Twilight where in this episode, Lesson 0, she doesn't get mad, or she gets even worse, or she does something else instead. It's a bit of an exercise if you want to look at it that way and just saying, all right, we have this, let's tweak something one tiny bit, and then you try to go from there and just carry it on to its logical conclusion. So I don't know if that helps too much. Again, I'm not really all that smart a person. I just fucking write. Some people like it, I guess. So, any other questions? Yes.
So inherently, then, because you're talking about established characters and how they're develop and character development.
Yep.
I would say, at least in my personal idea and example, an original character like No C, that's kind of the most general way to get into it in my eyes, because that is a complete open book where you can literally design the personality to however you see it.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you advise, per se, if someone's doing it for the first time, trying to write kind of a brain, would starting off with a character that they've just simply created for the concept be kind of ideal for a starting point? Mm-hmm. That would be more smooth?
That it can. The interesting thing about making a character from nothing is that, for the most part, you're going to have nothing to work with, which is kind of counterintuitive because obviously, well, I made the character, surely I should know this and this and that. Again, when it comes to the setting of, you create the world, then the history, then the politics, then the economics, and whatever shit like that, you just say, all right, here's a character where they pop out and she's fucking mad. Look at her. She's still mad. She's fucking center attention and she's still mad. Now, you know exactly that small bit. What you do from there is how she reacts. Is this due to the immediate circumstances? Is it due to something bigger? Is it because she saw something that just pisses her off? Is she normally that way? That's why we have the psychology of it. Is there something going on that's a massive stressor? Or is this kind of the normal, the mean? With that, you can only honestly find out as you continue to write them. Now, something specific that I choose to not do is edit. I try to not really overthink situations. Best example of that, say someone just pisses you off, they say something, you don't have a comeback for them until 20 minutes later. Son of a bitch, I could have told him that. And you know what, he wouldn't, everyone would laugh, everyone would be cool, they would think I'm the cool guy, they'd buy me drinks, I'd have a girlfriend, all these sorts of things. But you didn't think of it 20 minutes ago. So when it comes to situations and conversations, you have to keep that mentality of like, if it's later on of, man, she would have won that argument if she just said that. Well, did she think of it? Even if you didn't think of it, did she think of it? That's not the full Mare schizo thing going on. That's just the thing of sometimes things happen that even you don't expect. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It may not necessarily be a good thing either. So when it comes to making a character, the main thing I can think of is you have that nice base static idea, but you're not married to it. More so, they're not married to it because you don't even know what they are. They will show you. Now, if you can't really think of anything and they're just completely static and complete clay, just like clay, you smash it and start again. It may be that your setup isn't really catching you the way that you thought it would. It could be that it was a flash in the pan idea and once you actually sat down, you can't really follow up with it, which that happens dozens of times. A ton of people shit posting, it doesn't lead to anything because, it's a cool thing. I should make a full story out of that. All right, what would they do? I don't know. It'd make a full story, though. It's like, well, dude, a fucking toaster would make a good story. They made a movie called The My Little Toaster, and it's about a fucking toaster. It worked for someone, but it didn't work for you because it's not your type of story. It's not your type of character. Yes. And it might just not have worked out that well.
Like, I got 4 different OCs I'm still working on. Like, nothing's set in stone, but I'm like adding on different things. Like, I got some semblance of what their personalities might be like. Like, I got a guy. He's very friendly, but also sad because like his wife passed away. He's not quick to anger, but he has like an assistant in the kitchen that he just constantly lashes out at, but never anyone else.
Now, that's a very, very good example of context, because why is there only that one exception?
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that. It's something where when it comes to the relationship, when it comes to the marriage, what used to be the marriage, when it comes to how he reacts to that longer trauma, him being nice, is he overcompensating? Is he just naturally nice and this is his way of coping with it on a day-to-day basis? Is this something where he was really angry at her before she went, and now the dude he wants to fucking stay calm, doesn't want to blow his top again because last time he did, something bad happened. So there's a lot you can work with that just as a complete starter. The question is, depending on context, depending on how the story goes, you may get a different answer. And whatever answer happens to be chosen isn't necessarily any better or worse than the other ones. It's just that's kind of how it happened. So with that, the only thing I could think of is spitball it. When you have a character in mind, just think about them. Not necessarily in any sort of goofy romantic or waifu way, but just the kind of thing of, all right, you have this guy, he's going through this. You have to understand, as a married man who's now a widow, there's a lot of stuff that he no longer has. And you gotta think, not necessarily on the big thing of, sweet, the food bill's cut in half, but more the things of, you know what, that's her last bottle of shampoo in the shower. That by itself, when you lose someone, is extremely important, because when you get rid of that last bottle of shampoo, you get rid of the last bit of evidence they were in that bathroom. And it is no longer your shared bathroom, it's just yours. And for someone who's married and just a widow, that's incredibly crushing. Same thing with even just losing a family member. So you definitely have stuff with there. It depends on which direction you want to go, what contextual clues you want to have for the reader to have, and most importantly, what seems the most right for you. Because when you have a relatively blank slate like that, the only thing that really makes a difference is how you interpret it. And of course, depending on how you communicate that, you can get something that is very selling, to the point where people think, dude, are you the dude who got divorced, or are you the widow? It's like, no, I just know the guy. So stuff like that, I'm not going to say lean into the heavy stuff, but in that situation, there's a lot of heavy stuff. Because realistically, there's a lot of heavy stuff. So don't shy away from it. If it ends up being too much for you on a personal level, there are positive ways to think of that too. Again, think of the better times, how he reacts to those, if he still hangs on to those. Maybe a coping mechanism, it could be just how their relationship was. Or might be the philosophical aspect of, this is just how he is. He's very sad, he lashes out when he really shouldn't, just to one person that doesn't honestly matter to him all that much. But at his core, he's still just very happy, at least all that happened. But not all that is going to come out immediately. That's going to come out as he's challenged, as time passes, as he talks to people. I mean, a lot of people just talk to people. Issues are going on, fucking talk it out. You may not necessarily have an answer, but you'll at least have a better guide. So, but no, it's a good one. That's a harsh area, but one worth exploring. So, I have no clue what time it is. Yes.
So, in terms of pony psychology, how would you what makes pony psychology in a character more unique compared to, like, let's say, a human one? Like, how would a pony psychology write them, you would write them differently, like how a human psychology would demand.
With that, to use more college words, physiology. So, one of the threads I like to write for the most is bootleg, by the way, fun thread, fun people, fun stories. Not so fun stories, actually. But when it comes to that, psychology of a pony, you have not just how their body operates, but also the society that they're in. With Anon and Equestria stories, so much of the goofiness is because ponies are going to act like fucking ponies. And to be honest, the Equestria that we're shown, in a lot of environments, it's very low stress, carefree. You know, you get your career stamped on your ass and guess what? You're off to the races. Some people, very nice life. Other people, it's okay. Yeah, you've never got anyone from the Flintstones going, it's a living. Except maybe that one old donkey guy, but who cares, he's a donkey. So when it comes to pony psychology, especially if it's a setting where somehow they're in a human-infested world, you have to think of the basic things. How do they go to the toilet? I swear it's not a fetish question. Not right now, anyway. But you have that to ask about. Here's an even more simple one. They're stuck in a room. There is a door. The door is unlocked. How do they exit the room? Unless they have magic, unless they know how to use magic. They're a dog. They're basically a dog stuck in a room. They can bark, they can scream, they can poop on the floor. It doesn't mean the door's going to open. Now, extra challenge. There is a pony in a room, door closed. The door is locked. In front of the door, where the pony can see it, is a key. Simple, right? If I locked you in a room and gave you the key, what would you do? Yeah. How? With your sausage fingers, you planimal. So, stuff like that, it's very simple, it's very goofy, but you still have to think of that too. And it's a very, very humane way to think of it is, say, I'm sure there's a lot of weebs who want to move to Japan, right? They actually moved to Japan. Guess what? Culture shock, they don't know a fucking lick of Japanese, and they don't know how to read any of the signs, because you have two versions of written languages over there. What do? How do they know what to order other than to point and go, Which, if you're drunk enough in Japan, I'm presuming is accurate. If you end up going on the train, subway, whatever, how do you know which stop to get off on, other than the most basic being a color? I don't know, I take the red line. Well, the red line takes you all the way over there. Yeah, but I always take the red line. It's 20 minutes away. Why are you on the train for 5 hours? Because that's how the red line goes. It's not efficient, but it works. Same thing when it comes to ponies, at least in a more human-infested society or setting. They have to think of, all right, well, do I just sit there or do I do something? Which by itself, a nice philosophical question. Are they the sort to actually do something? Are they the sort to make their own solution? Do they fucking try to kick down the door? Do they jump out the window and hope for the best? Do they just start gnawing on everything? So, stuff like that. It seems goofy, but when you think more along that train of thought, as it continues, you'll start to get deeper questions of, all right, how does a pony cook? Because if they have magic, if they know how to use magic, it's like, all right, can I just fucking flash fry this TV dinner? All right, well, now the plastic's all melted, so it tastes like shit, but at least I ate something.
At the same time, I want to make sure like those unicorns have like a cop out and use their magic for everything. I think there's more unique ways to make like an earth movie, kind of do stuff.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing that the show brings up is not every unicorn can do the same thing. I mean, that's kind of why the most glorious, great, and powerful magician is not necessarily good at magic, but is a fucking master at sleight of hoof. And it's why Twilight is always so good at magic, but it's not to the point of DBZ. It's to the point of, well, she just knows like some very high-level esoteric shit, and she can actually handle it, compared to someone who's like, hey, here's a Pegasus. The most they can lift up, like, a few bags of groceries, but there's something else they can do with it. Now, that's my excuse, that's my mentality behind it. Just if you have certain aspects that they're really good and really bad at. For example, I can probably lift a good amount of stuff, but I'm not going to run a 5K anytime soon. Likewise, there are a lot of guys here who can just fucking run for hours and hours, doesn't bother them. But you give them 2 gallons of milk and they're just destroyed after 5 minutes. And the fun thing is, we're biologically, when it comes to physiology, we're all the exact same. You got 12 fingers, you got 13 toes, I hope. Most of us do, I hope. Yeah, see, there you go. You're the one who's going to mutate the least. You have all this stuff, but you still have so many differences. So when it comes to the question of magic, there's 1, how well is their natural affinity? 2, were they taught? Because, you have the goofy magic kindergarten, magic school, shit like that. They had to be taught how to do it. Much like if you have a gym class, you're taught how to climb. You're taught how to run reliably. You're taught how to lift stuff without hurting yourself in the process. So you have to think of whatever pony movements, whatever actions they can do, how magic works. The excuse I have is it's the same as any sort of muscle. Now, it's a bit more metaphysical, and I don't really bother with that because I don't really care, to be honest with you, on that deep a level, on a mechanical level, I should say. But it's still the task of how well did they learn? Did they learn at all? What was the incentive for them to figure it out? And it can be as selfish as, hey, I want to be awesome. I want to be Goku, except with magic. And then you learn, the fucking Kamehameha. Or it could be as petty as, hey, he likes her more than he likes me. Fuck. I'm going to do something about that. And then something happens and suddenly you have magic now. When before it seemed too difficult, seemed impossible, and now it just fucking happens. So with that, it would depend on whatever internal logic you would want to run with that character. When it comes to the larger setting, if you have just different unicorns, different types of magic, which may be worth looking into, it would depend just on that setting. So, any other questions?
Those moments when a character achieves all their goals, there's still more to say, however, and you realize that the worst thing you've done is have every one of their wishes come true.
Then they have to live with it.
Yes.
Well, think about it this way. If you won the lottery, if you won, just say $50 million, right? You would pay off your house if you own one. If not, you would fucking buy one in cash. You would pay off any loans that you have. You can get a shit ton of goofy stuff. You can live happily ever after because you own a home. Dude, you had $50 million. What can't you do? But the question is, what do you do once that happens? And that's something that I'm not exactly against the happily ever after type situations, but much like life, it keeps going. Yeah, what you think is, man, today's the best day of my life, it will never get any better. Shit, one day it may actually get better. Or it may be all downhill from there because you get complacent. That's an interesting topic. That definitely be something worth attaching on, because I think a lot of stories like that are very interesting. Because you'll have someone say, aha, I've accomplished everything, I've saved the world, I got the girl, I have an entire museum's worth of equipment, I have more money than I know how to spend. Awesome, credits roll. And then after the credits roll, the dude's still standing there. What the fuck is next? You've conquered all the challenges, you've done everything there is to do, as far as you're aware. Yeah, and that's kind of why I wouldn't really call DBZ that good writing, because one, it's weekly, so you have to keep it going. Two, the focus is the action, not necessarily the characters and not necessarily any plot, because that's why you just have, oh hey look, the Red Ribbon Army, yet again they're back, and somehow they're more dangerous than they were like fucking 30 years ago. Why? Because, I don't know, lol. Don't worry about it. So, when it comes to stuff like that, if you think someone has completed their arc, when you think that everything good that could possibly happen happened, if the story keeps going, well, naturally keep going with it. Good example, what if you have someone who everything positive happened, it's still happening, you know, still a millionaire, still on your home, but now say you've alienated yourself against your friends. Now, here's the thing. Do you share that with them? Where does that end? Do you have any leeches? What used to be your friends, are they no longer your friends? Is it because you didn't share enough of your wealth? Or is it because they're jealous? Or do they think that you don't even deserve it? Not necessarily for themselves, but dude, you're a complete jackass. Why did you win the lottery?
And then we can look at it with characters themselves, begin to wonder if they deserve it.
Yes. So, just from there, when you think you've hit a dead end, you just have to think on it, just like a real person, just how it affects them. And here's the other thing, too. Say, again, you have $50 million. A lot of people, when they get a shit ton of money, they become who they truly are. Because you get to the point of people where, they fucking spend it as soon as they get it. 5 years later, they're back fucking working at the Wawa making pizzas. Maybe because they're happier that way. Maybe they had their own mystical journey. Maybe they just drink it all. Or maybe they had what used to be a friend or a relative even stop by, and next thing you know, the money's gone. Or it's stolen. Or cops are called, and that nice little bit of fortune, due to a tiny little fucking technicality, you now lose it. Now, some people could argue that's a cop-out. That could be a thing of if it actually was stolen, you now get to see them rise up from everything, where everything in the world is perfect, to now you're back exactly where you were before. And whether or not that's a true fall or not would be the philosophical side. The psychological would be the sheer trauma of, yes, my life is taken care of, to fuck, I gotta work again until I'm 67.
And we could also find a way of making it a little bit more plot-driven, because I know there's some stuff down there.
Mm-hmm.
The money itself will become worthless over the course of a snap, like a weird currency devaluation.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden the plot makes it so that that's not actually as big of a thing as you thought it was.
Yep.
So there you go.
Yep, it could be. Yeah, it's like, cool, I got all this gold. Well, it turns out it's not gold, it's fool's gold. Or it's a lesser metal where it's still valuable, but like 10% as valuable. It's still a fortune, but due to that emotional roller coaster and how they view of, yes, I'm now secure in life, to I now have a nest egg. And it doesn't really feel as good. And just from that backlash, suddenly you have more things to draw upon. So with stuff like that, it's always nice to think of what would be the ending and just think, is it really the ending? Because much like life, it sadly keeps going and going and going until it feels like reruns. Until something goofy happens. Then you're back to fucking square one again. Good stuff. So, I can't think of anything else. I think we went through most of the topics I wanted to discuss. Technically, we have a half hour before another panel if anyone wants to discuss anything else or ask a question. Yes?
Yes. So I want to know what you think about the mysticism kind of about writing. I'm about to get into a little bit of schizo territory, but
Sure.
a lot of really good writers and some visual artists, like illustrators and painters, have told me that whenever they're really in the groove of their craft, they don't feel like they are the one doing it. It'll be like, like I didn't make this character kill that character. It'll be that character killed that character. I didn't do that.
Yep.
Or I didn't make the pose this way. The drawing knew what it wanted to be.
Yep.
What do you think? What do you know about that?
I'm guilty of that too. And it's something where after a certain point, when you're just kind of in the zone, you can see it happening, and you're the fly in the wall. When it comes to stuff like that, I wouldn't ever call it a bad thing. Now, if it gets to the point where you're fucking going on Topa territory, that's a little bit too far. But when you're at the area where you just sit down and it fucking goes, you don't think about it consciously. You may think about something like, it's gonna be awesome because this is gonna happen and it's gonna be interesting, and then something else completely different happens, and you keep going with it, and you're kind of like, all right, this is interesting. And at the end of it, you see how logically it fits. And depending on the character, how well you know them or how well you think you know them, it may just be a thing of, oh shit, that's actually very clever. That is something they would do. That is something that, when pressed with that, it's the more entertaining, it's the more tactile, it's the more efficient, or It allows them to just look plain better than everyone else. Depending on the motivation, there may be reasons behind it. When it comes to the art side of people just being able to draw shit and just put it out there, I can't draw stick figures, so I can't really write that well. Like with the pencil, I can't draw, but at least I can type, so thank God for that. But no, it's when it comes to that, it's interesting. I found out that apparently Quentin Tarantino has the same thing, which is interesting because people tend to like praise him on his dialogue. And like videos of him discussing how he wrote Reservoir Dogs, he did the same thing I'm talking about, where when you look at it, it's a play. Very little action is going on, it's just people fucking talking. And most of the movie takes place in exactly one fucking setting. It's all the warehouse. There are separate parts of the warehouse. There are flashbacks outside of the warehouse. There's the parking lot outside of the warehouse. But the vast majority of everything that happens is just in the warehouse. Yes. So, it's interesting because a lot of people tend to give those movies guff or they really, really like them, but it can work. And if you're the one writing that situation and it just gets out of hand, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, if you keep going for too long and it just drags on and it loses purpose, ideally it has a purpose, or it may just be a very entertaining conversation by itself. Again, I can't say what's good or bad writing, 50 Shades of Grey, so on and so forth. But no, it's something where if I could do anything, it would allow people to get more into that, where they sit down, they start on something, and then they just see where it goes. It can either be complete trash, your imagination goes wild and not so efficient a way, or you end up writing something that's just, you're embarrassed because it's not normally what you do, and you know what you do is not that good, and you're like, oh crap, did I just do something good? So
you'd say, not to put words in your mouth, but you think it would be more about exploring what there is that the characters are going to tell you, rather than trying to make something for them to do?
Yes. That's exactly why I would agree more with the idea of focus on your characters and then build out the world as it's applicable. Because again, there's a lot of stuff while writing the readers will never see. Just never. Because to be able to write that well, you have to write decently enough to get your point across. So you have to be able to give enough detail, enough context to articulate yourself. And then you have to hope that the reader will interpret it the right way. And when it comes to that, it's usually better to just have the writer or just have the characters do it. And when you get to the point where you think the characters are just leading things along completely, don't fight it. If it turns out really cool, good. If it turns into a situation where everything's really good and then one character fucks it up because they try to go too far in something, man, that sucks. But people actually do that too, don't they? And then from there, you may learn something about a character you really didn't think they would be okay with. If it involves another character, and if they also do something they really shouldn't do and normally wouldn't do, why was that? Was alcohol involved? Did everything just kind of slip up? Did someone not pay full attention to what was going on? I'm not saying that as the writer, but just, one character being sneaky, the other doesn't stop it, so on and so forth. So, examples like that, I can only endorse it. I really don't want to say what's the right or wrong way to write, but I would say the closest you could get to me saying it's the right way is just see what happens. If it turns out well, cool. If it doesn't, it's a nice practice.
It seems like the scale of being able to just react to whatever happens and go with it is the most valuable one.
Yes.
Any other planning you do will be redundant if the track goes away from your plans.
Yep. Best example of that too is if anyone's ever played D&D before. If you've ever played as a DM, your players will fuck you over at every chance you get. Better yet, because I was a fun D&D player, I fucked up my DM every chance I got. Mostly because I would always play a monk who had the grapple skill. And one time, our nemesis of our group of 3 was a Death Knight who had a Sword of Wishing. I was 12 levels below him, but I still won my grapple checks. My face got beaten in, but I still had a fucking sword of wishing by the end of it. So it's something where if you haven't before, D&D, it's a fun thing to play just because everything's focused on the characters. Even if you have an adventure module, you have the DM who spent weeks and weeks painstakingly go over this stuff of you're going to fight these guys, then go here and talk to him, and if you roll an 18, you can fuck that chick too, why not? Sure, I guess. And then it's like, all right, you're at the very beginning, what do you want to do? I want to ride the mule. It's not a mule. I want to ride it though. Do you have a ride skill? Yeah. What is it? +4 with a +2 modifier. Fucking.
D&D is basically the biggest improv game.
Yes.
It makes you super good at improv.
Yes, it does. Because you will eventually run out of notes and you'll have nothing else to do but just say, all right, fuck it. You ride the mule. Can I have a lance?
Can I ride it in good battle?
Yeah. It's like, why would you do that? Its walk speed is faster than me. That's because you're encumbered. Yeah, but it walks faster though. Fine, you ride the mule into fucking battle. The next thing you know, everything's off the rails. Yes.
To use the D&D example, like let's say Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay.
Yes.
The entire point of the game is that your characters do not matter, and that the course of the world will continue to build.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still possible to incorporate into a story where the choices or the inactions they take still matter to the world itself? Because the characters, they're still they're still the main characters. They're still the kind of the glue that holds the story together.
To their stories, yes.
Yeah, their stories. But their inaction will, is that still like a character story? How does that tie into it?
It depends on the context of their inaction. Because as some people would like to say, especially if they like being pains in the ass, they say, well, technically not making a choice is making a choice. Well, in certain circumstances, that can actually be a valid option. It's like, say, hey, we can take this warp stone. It'd probably save a lot of lives, but we're probably going to die in the process. We can probably fight our way out, but I'm not going to put my money on it. It could be a thing of, you know what, why don't we just walk away, steal some nice treasure, and then fucking head for the hills and then some. That by itself could be the story. More so, that by itself could lead to everything getting worse. Which, depending on how you want to plot things out, if you focus more on the immediate setting than the wider story, work from the small, the local, and move out rather than move out in, it could be that in action, them deciding, you know what, that warp stone makes my balls feel funny. I don't want to do it. Okay, congrats, you doomed the world. And whether or not your characters actually find out, they may never. But it may be, 20 sessions later, 15 levels on. Oh shit, that guy looks familiar. Didn't you kill him? Yeah, he's missing his jaw. No, he got someone's jaw back. It's not his. Oh fuck. What's that glowing thing? That's the warp stone, isn't it? Yeah. Oh shit.
And when do you focus on the immediate world? Like, what's the best time to focus on the immediate world rather than the entire setting as a whole? What's the right balance to strike?
I would. Now, just for clarity, when it comes to running the session of the game, because I've done a few things of both DMing and all that, I would say with that it would be worth paying attention to, at least keeping note of. But when it comes to, say, you're writing this out rather than playing it out, that could be a thing of, depending on the impact you want to leave to the reader, depending on the perspective it's being written on, where you can go beyond what someone's direct vision is, you can say, let's just split. Okay, ta-da, we completed the quest. And you can go as subtle as just saying, you know what, you get the feeling that maybe you kind of should have done a little bit more than what you did. You still helped out, you cleared out the cave, but the giant throbbing green rod or rock, it could be a rod too. It's just, you know what, that's still there, we kind of didn't really think about it. Interesting aspect to that, a little bit of a sidebar, is the Ultima games, because the first game, the fucking skeletal remains of the big bad from the first still matter 5 games on, because people don't fucking pick after themselves. Was that? Yep. Yeah, his stuff is.
Nickname after the guy who made it, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's he's Richard Garriott. He's a very goofy guy, but when it comes to how he's written his games, Spoonie did a really good video series on it, going from you have 1 through 3, fucking cracktastic, even the floor is out to kill you, to now you have this journey of enlightenment to become the Avatar. You know, everything goodly, everything awesome in the world, ignoring the complete hypocrisy of killing people just for easy experience and money. And then, in the following game, all of those virtues are being twisted immediately because you weren't really there, and it's like, you know what? There's this positive, but here's how it can be twisted into a negative. You know, charity. It's nice to give a dude $20 when he gives you a ride. A nice perversion of that, you will give away 20% of your money, or you will have no money. It's the exact same concept, but different execution. So, stuff like that, it's also interesting. If you really want to think that far down the line, you can think of the consequences of certain actions. Even if it's just interpersonal, it's like, you know a lot of people that you've known all your life. You can think of at least one situation of someone you really, really like, and you still can't fucking forgive them for that, because it's a bridge too far. It still pisses you off. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth after so many years. You can still think of it, and you're thinking of it right now. I can tell on your face. And you're just going, I love.
Sometimes you're the one who does the thing.
Yes, exactly. Whether or not you care, that's your own little journey. So, yeah, for the most part, I would say to focus just on the smaller party. But if it's something you think is important enough, then there is that leeway to have something expand further, presuming they're perceptive enough. Because that's the fun thing about writing dumb characters too. Sometimes they don't pay attention. What'd you do? I cleared out the cave. Was there anything else in there? No. Because, you know, the giant glowing green thing, it made it so you didn't need a torch. That's cool. You don't know if it's fucking magic or not. That would be nice. So that's something that I also like to tackle in different panel ideas, is the not necessarily scale and intelligence, but just perceptiveness. You know, how they interpret the world. A more dedicated look of, again, a good example, one that I really like, one that I'm trying to do with Twine, is have 4 characters in the exact same room, the exact same thing happens, but you'll get 4 radically different stories. Because what I notice about what people did in this panel is stuff that you didn't notice. That could be because we're looking in completely opposite directions. It could be because you're staring at me and hopefully her, and I'm just looking at everyone, including you. Not to single anyone out, but it is Horsewords and you. So that's something where, again, I don't want to go too much on mechanicals or exercises, but that would be very fun to do, just because you might surprise yourself on what they do differently. Even if it's already established characters, even if it's just complete nobodies you give like a color-coded name to. Again, Mr. Brown, Mr. Pink, Mr. Orange, Mr. Blue. So, I probably went off track a tiny bit, but I like to think that the main topic was focused on. When it comes to me using the nice fancy words of psychology and philosophy, the main reason for that is to just differentiate between something of how they naturally view the world, how that can change, versus what happens to them and how they interpret it. They may stick with it, it may just really, really fucking not let go, or it might just be something that they can shrug off. Or they see it in a different way. I mean, we all get in a car crash, everyone's gonna have a different reaction. Suddenly you're gonna say, I don't wanna drive. Now you wanna drive super aggressive because you wanna be the offender rather than the offendee. Or you just go, shit happens. You know, it's the first time that's happened in 40 years. What are the odds it's gonna happen again? Now, if it happens again, that's where you have a more interesting topic. So, that's pretty much all that I can think of. I mean, I can keep ranting, but it just devolves into weird buffoonery at that point, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yay, I even got clapping. I'm a real panelist now. And last bit, I said it earlier, but only you can write your stories. It's not just your character stories, but your stories too. But the reason why they are Horsewords in you and not you in Horsewords is because I don't want to put the cart behind or in front of the horse. See, at least someone got it.
I'm not sure if anyone's had a chance to come up and tell you this, but you're going to have to try and just project your voice a little more because we can't get you a microphone or anything.
That's fine. I've been trying to record on my phone. So that's what I'm kind of hoping for, where if I can just do this on... Yeah, if I can just find a way to